Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hardcore Finance with me, Shimon. Today, I wanted to talk about drivers for economic growth and zoom out a little bit because usually Alex and I are good at talking, recent events, analyzing the trends and the technical, aspects of the charts and all of that. But today, I would like to zoom out a little bit. And it's because I saw a really fascinating paper on artificial intelligence. By the way, there's a YouTube channel called 2-Minute Papers. It's really good. It's basically they take all the best papers of artificial intelligence and summarize them in like a video way. So I really encourage you to check it out. And what the paper showed basically is that there's a way to do those Snapchat filters when you can add ears or whatever to your face, to take it to a completely next level and create an avatar of yourself. It's a Disney character, it's a Pixar character, but it looks really, really good. So it would be my face, but like with the style of Family Guy, or with the style of Disney, or it's pretty amazing. And you can control different variables. It'll make the eyes wider or more narrow, so you can start with a style that's like Disney, for example, and then change it to create your unique style. You can mix Disney and Pixar together, right? You can even mix like two styles and create a third style automatically, or you can do it manually. And basically this got me to think, what is basically economic value? The value created is basically determined by there's different ways to measure it. For example, you can measure GDP, gross domestic product, which is basically the monetary value of all the products and services that have been created in a certain country, for example, or you can do it on a global GDP. And so that is okay, but it doesn't really measure the value, because some people criticize GDP by saying, look, all of the deflationary things, like the fact that Wikipedia gives you access to all this information for free, it's not really accounted for in the GDP statistics. Same thing with inflation, like with CPI. So you can think of, okay, there's the nominal GDP in dollar terms, but then we have to also look at how much prices went up. And so you can get to a real GDP. But the notion of a real GDP is really flawed as well. Why is it flawed as well? Because the consumer price index, it's an index that, in my opinion, is very, very misleading. And not because of the normal criticisms, like if you look at the Austrian economics or all of the all of these gold bugs, and people basically claim, the inflation, the CPI is actually much, much higher, than what the government reports, because they keep changing the basket of goods that's included in the CPI, and they always change it in a way that makes it lower. So they've never changed the basket of goods in a way that's yielded a higher number after the change. So that's like a fair criticism, but a much more important criticism, in my opinion, is a criticism brought up by Saifedean Ammous, who's the author of the Bitcoin standard and the fiat standard, and I think one of the most brilliant economists out there. He basically says, look, what you buy is affected by the price. So even if you try to say, okay, we're going to construct a basket of goods that's reflective of what people buy, right? When the price of certain things goes up, you buy less of it, right? And so, for example, steak became much more expensive, eggs became much more expensive, so people can switch to eating like tofu and, legumes instead of steak and eggs. And then when they actually look at what people buy, they'll say, oh, that's great. Like, people are buying less steak, so the weight of the price of steak in the basket will go down because people are buying less of it. So in a sense, it's completely meaningless. Now, it's better than nothing, right? You got to track something, and it's impossible. Another criticism of CPI is that Michael Saylor Michael Saylor brought up this criticism, which is like, if you live a certain lifestyle, your personal inflation rate can be drastically different than the average, right? So, like, for example, if you are, you want to send your kids to a really good college and you have a bunch of like medical expenses, and you have to live in New York City because you work in a job that only exists in New York City. So your price inflation will be much higher than someone who lives, somewhere cheap, watches Netflix, works from home, so like it's really tricky to understand, are we doing better or are we doing worse, both globally and also individually, by just looking at CPI and GDP and all of these other things. So I was thinking, what is another way to think about value? And I'm just thinking basically it's the sum of all of the benefit I'm getting and how much I would have been willing to pay for that, if I had to. So some things cost money and the other things, they don't cost money. I still get a lot of benefit from them. And when you start thinking about value in that way, suddenly you see, okay, the relationship with my friends is very valuable to me, even though it doesn't cost me anything. And so then the question is, okay, how do you increase that value? Like, how do you grow the value? Because basically that's what we want to do as humanity. We want to create more and more value, right? Under this definition that I just used. And when I think of all the artificial intelligence and the implication that it will have to all of our, industries, it basically creates something that's going to be a huge economic boom, even if it's not officially captured in GDP and CPI, right? So for example, many people say, ChatGPT is going to destroy many jobs because like there's many things that you have to hire, like a paralegal or something, to do something. ChatGPT can get you to 95% accuracy. And then if the trial case requires 99% accuracy of getting all the precedents and stuff, then the paralegal starts from what ChatGPT created and then gets better and better. And even more, you can train ChatGPT so it will learn, from your feedback. And so then a paralegal, let's say, that's very, very good at, accidents, like traffic accident cases, the more they work with ChatGPT, the better results they'll get. So by definition, you will need less of these people, right? And that's the example that people give. It's like, it's destroying jobs, but no, it's not destroying jobs. It's actually creating much more lucrative jobs. And so by freeing up people's time from menial tasks, they can start thinking of like actual value and how to create actual value. And if you think of the value that an average person, like let's say I'm in Manhattan now, let's say the average person on the street in Manhattan, how much value they create under my definition versus like a peasant 2,000 years ago, you can't even compare it. It's like many orders of magnitude. And so all we need really is just like abundant energy, which we have the technology, like with nuclear, to get abundant energy. And then we just need to figure out what people want, how to create what people want, and then how to deliver it to them, right? So for example, there's no more kind of world hunger. We kind of solved the problem of world hunger. Now, there's people that are dying from malnutrition, but dying from malnutrition is very different from like the famines that we used to have like 100 years ago, where like millions and millions of people would die just because the food, could not be grown. So if we think of like the hierarchy of people's needs, you first need shelter, food, like shelter, water, food, and then you go up the hierarchy. So my thesis that I wanted to share with you guys today is that the better we become at covering the bases of the pyramid and delivering like reasonable shelter, enough food to people, then we can start focusing on creating value in those upper echelons. And in these upper echelons, the laws of not the laws, but the theories of the economy are not that clear cut. So because like the traditional like supply and demand basically says, look, we have limited resources and unlimited wants and needs. And so that's why you need economy. That's why you need the whole profession of economy, because like if you don't have limited resources, then there's no need for economists, right? There's no need to plan anything. Like, so just like you don't have an economy for air, right? It's like maybe under very special circumstances, like if you go scuba diving or if you, but like normally there's nobody plans like how to price air and stuff like that. It's because it's very abundant. So the more things become abundant in the material plane, they will become scarce in the higher planes of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when we're thinking about AI, for example, to create art, right? To create art is a human need, maybe. No, the reason why we don't know that it's a human need, it's because like very few people could afford to spend a lot of time creating art, right? You need to be wealthy, or you need someone to pay you for the art, and you know it's like discretionary funds are not always available. So like the amount of people creating art is low relative today is low relative to where it would be 50 years from now, I think. And then when you start thinking of stuff like art or connection, like how to deepen a connection between two people, those things, I think there's an infinite space for growth there. And because there's an infinite space for growth, the constraints become just the constraints of how can you reorganize information, right? Elon Musk or someone else in manufacturing that I don't remember, I think Elon Musk likes to quote it, is basically all of manufacturing is basically rearranging atoms, but atoms are information, right? So like if you take a Lamborghini and you buy it and you drive it off the dealership and just crash it into a wall, the same atoms are still there, but their arrangement changed in a way that the value dropped massively, right? And so this AI thing is the first time where we can have the equivalent of an industrial revolution for information, right? So it's the industrial revolution for information. What the industrial revolution did to the quality of life of humanity, I think AI can do a lot more, because the physical needs are kind of limited, right? So you can't eat like 17 dinners every day. So there's only a certain amount of calories that you can eat per day and still stay healthy. So like, okay, you can upgrade your food choices. You can say, okay, I want to buy steak instead of like beans. I want to have grass-fed steak. I want to have Wagyu beef, grass-fed, whatever. But then at some point when all you eat is like very high quality food, which by the way can be grown, especially with the robots that Elon Musk is working on. They're supposed to replace a lot of the manual tasks that currently are really hard to replace. And so if we assume that we cover our bases on the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we open up to a space of unlimited wants, but also unlimited resources. Or I wouldn't say it's unlimited, because it's always going to be like improving, but let's just say the resources are massive, right? Because like atoms, we live in a finite planet, right? And so like there's only a certain amount of atoms that we can move around. But when we talk about information and how much information was created, like let's say per day now versus like 20 years ago, it's not even comparable. So we're stepping into a much larger playing field, and we're getting tools that are very, very powerful, like ChatGPT and like all of these AI generation of images. And then the other thing is like the integration between the physical world and the non-physical world is another space that can 10x or 100x the economy, just like almost overnight, when it becomes good enough that people use it. So I'll give you guys an example. Let's say you're walking down the street and like you have some AR glasses or something like that can show you a layer overlaid on top of reality, on top of the physical reality. Then people can actually pay for an NFT that changes, let's say changes their shirt, or like you can have a shirt that the front of it changes every 5 minutes for people who wear the glasses. And then the idea of like how to create art suddenly becomes so much more important. Like design and art and all of these ways of manipulating information visually can become super, super, super valuable, important, and used everywhere. So whenever I read people's takes on the economy and they say, "Oh, we have so much debt, we can't get away from the debt," or like one really interesting take that I heard from Nick Bhatia is like, "Look, usually the debt." When debt to GDP was super high, like now, it was because we had a war. And then when you stop the war, it's very easy to cut on the defense spending because like you literally don't need these soldiers, and then it's a double benefit. So you cut the defense spending, but then you employ these people in other productive things, and they actually kind of generate tax revenue. So the acceleration of like growth after a war is very, very powerful. And people mention the war in Ukraine, or people say that COVID was a type of a war. We like spent money to keep people home, and forced businesses to shut down and stuff like that. But I have an even more a take that's even more zoomed out than that. It's like, yes, the war in Ukraine will end, and all of that stuff will help the economy grow. But in parallel, the debt, if you think of it as just like this is the amount of debt, if we grow the economy like by 10x, then the debt becomes like insignificant. Now, when people quote growth, it's also misleading because like growth in GDP does not necessarily capture the growth in value the way I defined it. And so there's a narrative in the financial press saying, oh, we can't generate growth, we don't generate growth. It's like, no, you can't generate real growth, maybe, which means you're printing more money or almost as much money as the growth of the value, right, that is created. So basically inflation happens when the money supply grows faster than the money demand. And so basically what we're doing is the money demand keeps growing because the value of the economy keeps growing, but also the money supply keeps growing. So when you net these two and you say, what's the growth after inflation in CPI terms, you basically see not very much growth. And then people say, with this level of debt to GDP, it's going to be very, very hard to grow out of this debt. So we'll basically have to print a bunch of money. It'll create inflation. It's all the doom and gloomers. To which I say no. Like, you don't necessarily have to print a lot of money. All you need to do is like grow the economy really, really fast. And as long as the growth rate of the economy is higher than the interest rates that the Fed sets, then we're good to go. Like, maybe it will take 100 years to get rid of this debt, but like as long as we just keep growing the economy with stuff like AI, with stuff like electricity, all the things that are happening in Europe now, the war in Ukraine, it basically shows people, look, like this time, right, we kind of survived it, but like next time, if someone really crazy was there, like if someone like Hitler was there, he could just like shut off Europe's energy completely, and could, like, for example, even if it's like one big nuclear reactor or two or three, you could shut them down or bomb them or something. And so the whole idea of a distributed grid that's like very, very reliable, that has micro nuclear power plants, right, like that a nuclear power plant that can just power a neighborhood, is just super safe. So that future together with AI would be just like the growth in value that we're going to see is going to be off the charts. Now, a common criticism of that says, no, because we live in a democracy, so we cannot, people will vote to always give themselves more money and always to bankrupt the state, right? So there's this saying that every single fiat currency has failed, because like people just vote policies that increase the money to get like Social Security, to get Medicare, Medicaid. To which I say, that assumes that Medicare and Medicaid, they cost like what they do today. But we have ways of dropping the cost really, really seriously. I always use this example of like, what if you could just like do a video call with a doctor in India who diagnoses you over video and then sends you some pills from India through FedEx, even if it's like prescription pills, right? If we had that, the cost of healthcare would go down like crazy, right? And that's like on the regulatory front, but we also have like technological innovations. Like, for example, you can have a robot surgeon that's actually operated by a person, but that person can be in Sri Lanka operating someone in Manhattan, right? So you can't say, oh, you don't have license to practice. And it's like, you can do a lot with technology. So maybe Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all of these things will have their quote unquote war in Ukraine moment. Well, people will say, well, if we don't change the system, if we don't reform the system, it's not going to be sustainable. It's going to bankrupt us. And then hopefully this will drive change and reform. So I'm an optimistic guy. And I really hope that that eventually, when push comes to shove, I think Winston Churchill said that the US basically always does the right thing after it's exhausted all other options. But the point is that the US does the right thing. And you know, they're very smart people. They're trying to do policy that, like, under the constraints that we have, you know, what's the best decision that we can make. And so, but I really think that the energy that can create enough power to move physical stuff around and reassemble physical stuff and move it around, and then AI that can reassemble information and basically it can do things. It's crazy. People build entire websites just by using ChatGPT. And when I say build a website, I don't mean they drag, here's the button, here's the image, whatever, and the website works. No, it's like prompting ChatGPT, hey, make me a website where, you know, my picture is in the middle and there's a contact me form at the end and stuff. And the website just pops up, like code pops up. You can upload it to a server and it just works. So just think of how much time was wasted just building websites. And suddenly, like, it can be like having a website would be like, you know, people today know how to read and write. And you know, many years ago, like 600, 700 years ago, very few people knew how to read and write. So if you needed something to be written or to be recorded, you would go to someone who knows how to read and write, and they would do it for you. And that's exactly the how websites are today. Like, if you don't know how to build a really good website, you know, you go to a developer and they build the website for you. It doesn't have to be this way. It can be just like, here's the website, and you just like, all you have to do is think of the text that you want on the website, but everything else will just like take care of itself. So, you know, it's scary. The disruption can happen really fast. I'm again in New York now. The schools here banned the usage of ChatGPT, both for teachers and for students, which is like, it's completely, you know, insane, because like you can't enforce it. You know, yes, if I ask ChatGPT, you know, a question, take the answer and just submit it as an essay, of course there's going to be software that can detect that it was written by ChatGPT. But what if I take the essay and just like rewrite it in my own words? It's still much, much, much easier than writing the essay from scratch. And then people say, oh, people will forget how, you know, lose the ability to think. No, they won't. They just will not waste time to gather information and figure out how to present it in a way that's palatable to the other side that's getting your communication. Just think of how much time is lost by ineffective communication, right? Like bad websites. Like, how much time have you lost by like trying to find something on a on a website to buy a ticket or something? So all of that time is going to be saved. And when we're thinking of time, that's actually another thing that I wanted to cover, which is like, there's basically the traditional, when you go to business school and you study about GDP, they basically say, look, the stock market goes up because there's two main drivers. There's productivity growth and there's humanity growth, like population growth. And so population growth is both like people having more kids, but also like people living for longer, right? So you have more hours to consume and produce as a person, and you have more of these people. So we know that population growth will peak at some point, like 10 billion or so. Those are the projections. But what doesn't necessarily peak, or what has a lot of room to grow, is the time you have, right, to produce and consume. So think about it. If currently you have 8 billion people producing and consuming at a certain level, and suddenly you double the time someone has to produce and consume because of efficiency, it's almost like having 16 billion people on the planet. Like, think of the profits of the companies selling stuff to these people. And so time is becoming more and more abundant. The energy is becoming more abundant. Anything material is becoming more abundant. And now, for the first time, like, manipulating information is becoming easier, and again, it's more efficient. And those two worlds are merging with VR, with AR, all of these things. So I'm super excited and I'm super optimistic. The only thing is, like, leverage can cause you to get a margin call. So be very careful with leverage. But I mean, if you just like live your life and save a certain portion of your income and just invest it in whatever, it doesn't really matter in whatever, in what, like in this episode, I'm not going to talk about different ways to invest it. Just invest it in whatever, even if it's like real estate in New York, or, you know, if you invest in stocks or crypto or whatever it is, all of those are derivatives of the productivity of humanity. And what I just saw is just like, it blew my mind in terms of how much more productive we can get. So please, guys, tell me what you think. Am I too optimistic? Do you see any problems? You can always write to us and like and subscribe. And we've been getting some really good feedback about the latest episodes. So yeah, any feedback is welcome. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.